Hello, and welcome to the October 2024 meeting of Triangle Association of Freelancers. Our guest this evening is award-winning fiction writer, poet, and editor Sheree Renee Thomas, who will be in conversation with Tara Minter. Tara?
Thank you. Sheree Renee Thomas is an award-winning fiction writer, poet, and editor. Her work is inspired by myth and folklore, natural science, and Mississippi Delta conjure. The author of 3 collections, including 9 Bar Blues, Stories from an Ancient Future, Sleeping Under the Tree of Life, and Shotgun Lullabies. Sheree is a co-editor for Africa Risen, a new era of speculative fiction, Trouble the Waters, Tales of the Deep Blue, and is the editor of the groundbreaking anthologies Dark Matter, A Century of Speculative Fiction from the African Diaspora, and Dark Matter, Reading the Bones, that first introduced W.E.B. Du Bois' work as science fiction and explored 165 plus years of Black speculative fiction. She is the first Black writer honored with the World Fantasy Award. In 2023, she was honored with the Octavia E. Butler Award. Her poems appeared most recently in This is the Honey, an anthology of contemporary Black poets, and The Future of Black, Afrofuturism, Black comics, and superhero poetry. Her work is widely anthologized and appears in the Big Book of Modern Fantasy, edited by Anne and Jeff Vandermeer. She is the associate editor of the historic Black Arts literary journal, Obsidian, Literature and the Arts in the African Diaspora, founded in 1975, and is the editor of the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, founded in 1949. She also writes book reviews for Asimov's. Her essays have appeared in the New York Times and Scientific American. Sheree is an educator who has taught creative writing workshops at universities, in MFA programs, and in community and cultural organizations around the world, including the Clarion West Science Fiction Writers Workshop, Under the Volcano, and more. She is a Marvel writer and contributor to the groundbreaking anthology Black Panther, Tales of Wakanda, edited by Jesse J. Holland. She's the author of the Marvel novel adaptation of Black Panther, Panther's Rage. She has new stories in the forthcoming anthology, Captain America, The Shield of Sam Wilson, which is coming out January 14th, 2025. She lives in her hometown, Memphis, Tennessee, near a mighty river and a pyramid. So welcome so much. Welcome to the TAF meeting.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be among you and to learn more about the work that you all are doing in North Carolina.
Thank you. So usually the first question is, what inspired you to become a writer?
I think I was inspired by admiration of some really great storytellers in my family. My grandfather Ezekiel was a wonderful storyteller in particular. He would tell us stories about his youth. He was from the country, even though we're in Memphis. He was from Fayette County in West Tennessee, and he would make it sound, very powerful and interesting. He also would tell us scary stories, which were my favorites. He'd tell us Bible stories, and he would always choose the most dramatic ones, of course, to capture our attention, but also to share a moral tale or something, to instill some type of sense of wonder, I think, about us being alive on the planet, and not being the only force, right? There being a higher force above us that orders things, whether we understand it or not. And I think it was the power of his storytelling that really got me to trying to write my own little stories. And then he and other family members were really great listeners. So from that, they humored me a great deal. By the time I got to school, I thought of myself as a writer and always took, great pride in, the work that I did in school that allowed me to be creative. And I was just a voracious reader. So for me, writers were very magical beings. They had a special ability, right? They were able to transport me with their words and to make me feel things and to believe things, just on the strength of their storytelling. So that was a big part of it.
All right. So let's talk about for you, you've done a lot of short story writing over the years, among other things. But talk about, can you discuss what led you into writing short stories primarily?
I think because that was my introduction to the genre. The anthologies in particular were very important to me. They allowed me, because they're already curated by an editor, they allowed me to sample different stories, different aesthetics, different rhythms, different ways of telling story, right? Plots and things from different writers. And I was able to, gather a list of people that I was interested in following up on and seeing their other work. Sometimes you would see some of the same writers in the year's best anthologies, and they would be totally different stories, right? And so I liked that. I particularly enjoyed being able to read a writer and never guess exactly what kind of story I was going to get next. And so I liked that as a form. I thought it was a pretty amazing form. It's designed to be read in a single sitting for the most part, right?
Yes.
Not an easy thing to do. I feel like you have more room to make mistakes with novels. And I feel like readers are more forgiving with novels than they are with short stories. Yeah,
Okay.
I think that was the thing that really got me into it, just the anthologies. My mom had, she had the magazine. I can't believe it's just going out of my head. That Ellen Datlow edited for a long time, and I got a chance to Omni magazine.
Okay.
So I got a chance to read work by Greg Bear and work by Howard Waldrop, and Howard Waldrop in particular was a writer who I was never quite sure what kind of story I would get from him. Is it an alternate history? Is it, science fiction? Is it fantasy? Is it humorous? Is it, dark? It was, and I like that. I like that that realm of possibility for the short stories.
Yeah. So you're known extensively as an editor of a lot of great books and anthologies. So how did you come about getting into the field of editing?
That's an interesting question. Because I didn't really edit anyone else's work when I was coming of age. I only worked on my own stuff. Now, verbally, if we're telling stories, right? That's not exactly editing. I don't know what that would be called. Directing, coaching, I don't know. Because I had siblings, and we used to write rap lyrics, we used to write songs. We used to, sometimes redo music videos and create our own, concepts and stuff like that. So we're always creating things. Was into visual art as well. But I believe it was, I started thinking about editing. I was working at an independent Black bookstore in Memphis called Gallery 350. And a friend of mine who is a writer, a TV writer now, Jamie Hatley, she writes for P Valley. She had come to me, and we were never really scheduled to work at the same time, but we would overlap sometimes, coming or going. And one day she walked in with a copy of Black Enterprise magazine, and on the cover it was on Black people in publishing, right? And she says, "Sheree, I think this is for you." And so I get the magazine and I look at it and I go, "Wow, all these people are in book publishing." And I'm in this bookstore, and of course I have all these books at home and have been, reading books forever and a day. And I'm looking at all the imprints, and there's some that I had a particular affinity for. I really love Knopf because of Toni Morrison's novels. There were some others that I had an affinity for. I like the cover art and the designs of their books and things like that, as well as the authors that they published. But I never really thought about the imprints. So when I realized that there were a group of Black women in publishing who had created One World Books, which was the first multicultural imprint of a major Big Five publisher, I thought, oh, maybe this is for me. Because if you're going to be a writer, you're going to dream and go to the big city of New York, which is the heart of publishing in our country. You're going to have a day job, right? I didn't think I would just shoot off and be a Stephen King or what have you. And even he didn't shoot off overnight, right? But I was thinking about it, and I thought, well, if I'm going to have a day job, let me in book publishing so I could sit amongst other kindred spirits, other people who love writing and books. And I can learn what it means, what it takes for a manuscript to get developed over the 9 months to become an actual printed book, and all of the helping hands in the various departments that help make that happen.
Okay.
So that's how I got interested in editorial. Now, the actual how I got my job and all that, that's a whole nother story.
Okay. So if someone is wanting to become an editor, do you have any tips or recommendations for how they can get started?
Yeah, and you ask a different person, you're probably going to get different tips. I would think first, really take stock of yourself. What are your strengths? What are the areas that you fall down on? Because there's certain things that you're going to need to help you work through the process of doing long-term books, projects that take a while to do, and also working with multiple personalities, working with different people, right? Authors are an interesting group of people. And so, so you want to have some stamina in terms of dealing with strangeness. I will say that, and insecurity, and also the kind of grasping. I want to be a star. I don't think it's quite like actors, but there is an element to that. So if you're used to dealing with people on a very genuine level, and it's not transactional, your feelings can be hurt from time to time in the field. So that's something to think about, the psychology of it, of yourself, and also of what you're going to be doing. And then think about the kinds of projects you want to work on. I know I'm anthologist. I loved anthologies, right?
Yeah.
And it's one way for me not to be bored, for sure, because I'm going to get some different stories from different writers. And even from a single writer, I would get a different story from you. You're not going to send me the same kind of story each time. So that's exciting and fun. You want to be detail oriented. You want to be able to manage time. You want to be willing to do all of the grunt work in terms of administration, because writers have lots of questions, especially new writers who are unaccustomed to the publishing process, or have experienced different ones, because they can be all very different from magazine to magazine, from house to house. What are the conventions, right? And so you're going to have to unpack some things so that they know what's expected of them, right? And what's going to happen next. I would tell you to go and find a book, or if you want to do novels, right? Think about what it is that makes you really plug into that particular novel. Why do you care about these characters? Do they have a visceral impact on you? What do you remember the most? What are the skills that you can really point out and say that this writer is doing very well? Because those are the kinds of things that you're going to want to point out for a new writer or client that you're working with, right? How to tease out those things. Editing is mostly about asking the right questions. The authors, I would say 8 out of 10 times, already know the answer. They're just not sure of where they may have it in a different draft. They may have second guessed themselves and didn't put it in there, or taken something out that needed to be put back in. They have the whole world of their characters sometimes. And sometimes there are things that they haven't thought about, right? And you're that person, you're that extra motivated reader that's going to ask them the questions and make sure that you've got the continuity and what's the age. And there's levels to that, with the line editing, the developmental editing, the copy editing. There's so many different kinds of editors that you can be, right?
Yeah.
So just realize that, do you still love books even if you have to see them when they're messy?
Okay.
Yeah. And if the answer is yes, then you would be a pretty good editor.
Okay. Wow. I don't know what I was expecting, but that's amazing when you think about the other side of editing, the personalities and stuff that you have to handle.
Oh, that's a big part of it. Some personalities can make you want to quit. And then others you just so grateful to have known them,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So when I was blown away by Dark Matter when I first read it years ago, and apparently it's the first short story collection of speculative fiction by African American writers, period, in this country. And so what inspired you to put this anthology together?
in the world, actually.
Wow, in the
In the
world.
world, and as far as we know, in languages, it hadn't been done. Since then, we have lots of writers of color who have come together and done, or other editors who come and have done those kinds of collections.
Mhm.
And that's been really good to see, but it was the first.
Wow.
I can thank the Schomburg and other archivists for checking, because I didn't even realize that it didn't exist before.
Mhm.
It did, yeah. Yeah, it was something I wanted to read, and I just assumed was already out there at a
Mhm.
bookstore. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you for putting it together, because as a reader of fantasy and science fiction, it was mind-blowing to see that African American writers had been in the business of writing these stories for hundreds of years. For me, I thought it just only went back to the 60s with Sam Delaney, and then 70s and 80s with Octavia E. Butler, to find out there was so many more that were writing. It was mind-blowing for someone who loved the genre. So thank you for putting it together. I read
Thank
both
you.
versions.
Yeah, the writers were really generous, because I didn't have any footprint in book publishing at that time. So they were really moving on act of faith to trust me with their stories. So yeah, and of course it's their stories that made it, that we're still talking about to this day. So yeah, and they're being taught. I find out, um, every month or so, a different place has chosen to put, if not the whole book, some of the stories as part of the syllabus for a class. So that's been really
Mhm. Great.
great.
So, what types of stories do you look for when you're putting together a collection of short stories?
Hmm. When I do an anthology, with the exception of the dark matter, because dark matter anthologies and the Africa Risen, they're open themes. So we didn't have a specific theme, like these are only three-legged robot stories, we didn't do that. But for Trouble the Waters, Tales from the Deep Blue, that was inspired. Like, my anthologies are inspired by a strong desire for me to want to read that book. And I
Okay.
think, hey, wouldn't it be amazing if we had stories on this in this area, right? And what if we found writers who wrote new stories on this topic, or maybe they already have some of these stories, and we put them together, and now we can read it and have this experience, right?
Mhm.
So what I'm looking for are usually character-driven stories, stories where I feel invested in what's happening to the character. I don't have that same pressure for characterization for flash fiction. Usually that's kind of a magic trick to me. It's kind of like, how can you engage me with the least amount of words, right? And it's just, the ideal, or imagery. It's almost like poetry, right? I mean,
Mhm.
we can have whole novels in verse, right? Gail
Yep.
Jones's novels in verse, et cetera, et cetera. But what I mean is, like, poets are masters at distilling ideals and distilling images in ways that we feel and we remember when they do it very well, right? It resonates with us. So
Mhm.
for fiction, I'm looking for stories that the characters are well drawn, they make sense in the way, and if they're weird in a way that I can believe for them, that's consistent for how you've developed them as a character and the background that you've given them. I like clear prose, and I also like lyrical prose, right?
Mhm.
So I like to know that you've taken some time to think about how you're telling me the story and the way that you introduce the story to me. I like to feel grounded in the world. So I teach a workshop at under the volcano in Mexico. It was called Writing with a Sense of Wonder, right? Because I feel like that was one of the things that especially when I was reading submissions for FNSF, the things that would make me not want to read past page one, or sometimes not past the first paragraph of the story, is that there was a kind of a flatness to it, right? And if it's a flatness, it's not going to make me want to keep reading on to see what happens, to find out when it gets good. And especially if you've got a ton of stories to read, and you know that you can't publish even all the great ones, you have to send them back into the world and let someone else publish them, right? Because I
Yeah.
don't have an infinite budget, don't have infinite pages. Readers aren't going to read forever. So
Mhm.
you
Okay.
have to have something. And for me, if I'm unengaged in the beginning, that means likely my readers are going to be unengaged too, right? So having a sense of how you tell the story, the pacing of it, and that's not always an easy thing to do. I'm looking for your unique personality that's in your writing, you know, because humans are humans and we're going to be doing human things, right? We're going to fall in love, we're going to fall out of love, we're going to be selfish, we're going to be generous, we're going to do all the things that humans do around the planet. How can you bring something interesting to that experience for us as a storyteller, right? Also, the stories that I end up keeping are the stories that I remember.
Okay.
And there's stories, and that's not an easy thing sometimes because, and of course, it's all subjective. So you can just throw this out the window for the next editor that comes. It's all subjective, right? But for me, the stories, like if I read like FNSS was getting between 12, well, they told me 1,200, and then it was a lot more than that. And then, you know, sometimes it tapers off depending on the time of the year, but between 12 and 1,800 stories a month.
Wow.
So obviously I'm not reading every story, every page of every story. I'm reading to get you out of my box, right? Out of my portal. And the stories that I stick to are the ones that I remember, that I'm just like, ooh, wow. Oh, I can't wait to tell someone about this story, right?
Okay.
If I want to retell your story to someone else, that's a story I want to keep. That's one I'm going to hold on to. And then I have to compare it and look like, you know, of all these stories, you know, what can I publish? And the thing I'll just say that surprised me when I started editing the magazine, because editing an anthology is a different experience than editing an ongoing magazine. Even though I feel like FNSF is like books, right? They're 258-page issues. So to me, that's it's basically an anthology. We were doing 6, now we're doing 4, right?
Okay.
So I think about it and I go, even though all these stories may be rated a 10 or whatever, which means, oh, extraordinary, they're hitting all the notes, never seen anything like it, or somebody's going to cry when they read this story or what have you, right?
Yeah.
I can't publish all greats. I can't, even if I wanted to, right? And also that's a different experience because there's certain kinds of, there's a thing that I want people to experience when they read the magazine. And so they're hitting different beats for me, right? And so I have a particular way that I look at it. So they're not all going to be like off Earth, you know, extraterrestrials, you know, science fiction stories. I want science fiction on Earth, off Earth. I want, you know, fantasy stories. I want the kind of slipstream, interstitial, really like border crossing genre stories. I want the weird tales. I do like weird fiction. I want the reimagined folk tales, reimagined fairy tales, because I truly love those.
Okay.
and readers always are like, they're endlessly interesting to me. Because people are writing from their unique personalities, and so they tell them differently. They really do. And if you think about it, great editors like Ellen Datlow and Terry Wineland were able to do whole volumes of reimagined fairy tales as a series year after year. So you would think, well, when are they going to run out of these kinds of stories? There's so many different minds out here, right?
Yeah.
Lots of ways you can tell it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but can you talk about your experience as editor of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction? You're the second woman, first African-American woman to hold this position. This magazine's been in existence since the 40s. So what has it been like?
It's been a trip. It's been something else. I will say that. It's been some highs, it's been some real lows. I already knew I was going to get a lot of drama for being me, right?
Yeah.
Going in, you already know you're going to get the, oh Lord, you know, this science fiction is over, you know, and you know, and we've been hearing this stuff. I mean, I'm a child of the 70s. There are people much older than me. You already know we've been hearing this foolishness for a century, right?
Yeah.
You know, anytime you're in a space that people perceive that you shouldn't be in, right? They get nervous. So they just change the terms that they use. I don't care. I don't need anyone's permission to be a science fiction fan. I don't need anyone's permission to be a science fiction reader or writer. And I certainly don't need their permission to be an editor. So that's one thing. I also am very conscious that a lot of us are often have more experience than people who with other identities, and it's never questioned, right? I was literally at a weird fiction convention, which I enjoyed. My first time at Necro Comic Con.
Okay.
So if you like weird fiction, not just H.P. Lovecraft, but other kinds of weird fiction as well, then I think it's a good con. It's a small con. It's fun. It's in Providence, which is a interesting city to visit, and then it's at a great location and nice people. So I had a great time there. But I'm always a little wary, right?
Yeah.
Writers are weird. And writers in the wild are even weirder. I'll just say that. But I had a nice time, and I was thinking about it. This whole idea of who gets to be a part of the genre and where people expect you to be, and who do they think has access to it or what have you, right? And there were so many different definitions of weird and so many different kinds of writers, right? Who were doing work, and they all had something fascinating to say. We did a panel on architecture, right? Weird housing, in stories. And it was just fascinating. And so I never want to feel like, I just want to say I never really spend a lot of energy on bad faith people, right? Because I'm not editing for people whose peak was 1950, right? That's a whole different world. That's a whole, you were a teenager at a whole different time period. I have adult children, and when they were teenagers, totally different world than when I was a teenager and their uncles, right? So the kinds of work that would have interested me as a young person is different than the kinds of work that interests my children. And so I'm always conscious of not only the classic readers of FNSF, but also new readers of FNSF, and also aware of people that I really love and admire who never published in the magazine. What was that about? You know what I mean? So it's like, if you don't see a thing, then you don't think that it belongs there. You know what I mean? So I already know whatever I'm doing is going to be a cause of discussion to some extent. And so I would prefer the discussion to be on the work, on the writers, because I'm not going anywhere in terms of my aesthetic of what what I want to do. So that's what I'll say about that.
Okay. And you've already answered this question about the kinds of stories you're looking for the magazine. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
I mean, I feel like you all seem like such seasoned writers that I don't want to preach to the choir, the pulpit, as an elder said. But I just feel like sometimes people are unaware that we're humans on the other side of the screen. And editors are people, and that we have an actual personality, and we have relationships, and we know each other, and we know writers. So the way you interact with editors shouldn't be any different than the way you interact with other people, other professionals, right? Just treat people with some kindness and some civility. Especially if you want to be published by them.
Okay. Wow.
I blink very slowly about that. We have a contracts backlog, and the contract at this point, it's like, I know what the issues could be, but if I'm not the person writing the checks, it's not coming out, right? So that's the publisher's role. I'm very clear on what my role is. Everybody knows who our publisher is. They've been smiling in his face for decades, so they know who it is. So my question is, at this point, the submission portal is closed because of the backlog. Once I get the green light for him that it's a wrap, then it makes sense for me to bring in more stories and start moving that process. At this point, I don't want to bring in another 1,800 stories they're going to create another logger jam, if he's not able to pay for them quickly. right?
Mhm.
So there's
Yeah.
no point. So I got a letter on my personal website. And the letter was basically, when are you going to open the portal? Good question. I think you should open it right now because I have a story I want to send you. Okay. But the way that they said it was horrific.
Oof.
Why would you think I would ever want to publish you? Even it's the best thing. It's like if your story cured cancer, I'm not going to publish you. Someone else will have to have that honor and that privilege.
Mhm.
You know, like, because no one, you're not owed publication. And I think that's something that people don't always understand. You're not owed publication. I'm not owed publication. No one is owed publication, right?
Yeah.
So just, move with some type of common sense
Mhm.
and some kind of decorum.
Okay. All right. Wow. There's some stories there.
Yes. And it goes two ways, because I've received some pretty weird stuff from editors in my journey, as you know.
Mhm.
So never get too full of yourself. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Just stay humble. Okay.
Yes, be humble, because the person that you were so, cruel to, because you can pass on the story about being like ridiculous about it, right?
Yeah.
Next thing you know, they may be the next writer that's floating on the cloud of glory,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
you were being really mean to that writer and when they were coming up for no reason,
Mhm.
So
Good
be
point.
kind. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so you've contributed to both the Black Panther and Captain American short story collection that'll be coming up. So what was it like?
Coming out in March. I just found out from another writer that's coming out in March. So we
Oh,
get
okay.
the scuttlebutt late
Okay.
sometimes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was it like playing around in the Marvel universe with these existing characters?
It was exciting. It was nerve-wracking at first because I was like, oh my gosh, because fanboys are crazy. So it's just like, you do one thing and they're like, no, the Black Panther is wearing, cobalt blue Pantone flight number da 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 da, and you
Yeah.
changed it, So, and I'm watching like big time celebrities getting harassed for even just being mentioned as being cast in these projects. So
Wow.
I looked to my husband, I said, oh my gosh, I don't know how traditional of a Marvel writer it is, but if I'm going to play in someone's sandbox, I'm going to bring myself to it, right?
Yeah.
So I ended up pitching something, and fortunately my editor liked it, and fortunately Marvel's editors, the Titan editors and the Marvel/Disney editors liked it. And then I had to write it, and I had a very short amount of time to write it. So that was the nerve-wracking part, because I don't know how long it takes for you all to write a story, or how long you're usually given to do it. Maybe you might see a call for submissions pretty late in the call, right? And then you need to hit that deadline, and you can be highly motivated sometimes, but we had a pretty short window for writing it, and I was able to get through. So I was very excited about it.
Wow.
But it was fun. At the time when I did the first story, it was part of a Panther. I brought the Black Panther to the Mississippi Delta on a very serious mission.
Yeah.
Able to bring in the things that I'm interested in to that universe, and it was a lot of fun. But I didn't have like contemporary maps because we couldn't use the movie. You're not using Marvel Cinematic Universe. You have to use the canon from the comics, and they had the very old maps from the 60s, right, and the 70s. Not any like all the great AI stuff that they created or whatever they created for the movie was irrelevant. So a lot of things that some things aren't named, and they're, this is a lot of stuff. So you had to kind of create that yourself, and then they vetted and decide if they want to keep that or not, right? But I found out after the book was out, that there was a whole nother project by another author, other people that I guess they had the licenses, who were doing whole maps, new maps. And I was like, that would have been really helpful
Wow.
to have, because I actually drew my own map, and penciled in and made the changes and stuff. And then I found out that Karima Horn was also doing a project, which was on the guide, training guide for the Dora Milaje.
Oh,
You know, that would have been really helpful to have as well, but
yeah.
it's how it is.
Wow. Okay. Well, my final question is one I like to ask a lot of people, which is, if someone is new to your catalog, what book or short story would you recommend that they start with?
I would just have them go to 9 Bar Blues, which is behind me.
Okay.
I don't know if you can see
Yeah, I
that.
can see it. Yeah.
Short stories from Third Man books. And it's just kind of like, it's a little dip into my weird brain. The short stories, it covers all kinds of things. If you like vintage, going into crates for vintage vinyl, you know, I got a story for you. You like Robert Johnson, weird, you know, Crossroad Tale, got something for you.
Mhm.
All kinds of things, like a little scary stuff, something with tarot, and a little bit of tarot in it.
Okay.
You know, and mostly about family dynamics, sibling rivalry, how people treat children, um, history and geographies and cultures over time.
Mhm.
I have a new collection coming out next year called Mojo
Okay.
Rhythms. And so you can look forward to the new stuff there as well.
Okay.
And I have some stories on Apex that are online.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. This is the part of the program where opening up to questions. Does anyone have any questions for Sheree?
I'd like to start. Sheree, I was curious as editor of F and SF, what you have found to be the most common issues from what are obviously new writers who are contributing to the magazine. What are you seeing most often as far as problems within manuscripts?
They're not sure where to begin the story. So the beginning is either throat clearing or it's very muted. It doesn't get us as close to the action or the catalyst of the story as possible. So I think if the you know, some stories can be experimental, and I understand that. So I don't want to discourage people from doing their weird thing. Do your thing. But if you're in a big market publication that you know there's a lot of stories going to be submitted, then you want to get as close to the start of the story as possible with the character that has the most to lose in that situation. Like they may have other people around them, but we don't need to know all their backstory immediately. Get us to the thing that is the problem or the challenge for them of the day of all days, right? And then move the story from there. So that's one. Not doing it sometimes can make the story unengaging, which is just a fancy way of saying boring. Boring writing is the main thing that gets people's work rejected. And what's boring for me may be different for another editor or reader, of course. But for me, I find it just doesn't have, it's generic. It doesn't have an actual point of view. It doesn't have a personality, you know? It doesn't have, it's not a world that feels real, you know? It's just very generic. It's almost like the draft of a story, right? And I think you got to write it enough, look at it, and then go back and add, like I call it, go back and add the juicy parts. Go back and add, and for sometimes it might be interesting character, you know, dialogue or dynamic. Sometimes it may be the way that you tell us something, the action. It could be in the world building, right? That's the part, that's the juicy part. It's like, oh, I really like being in this person's imagination, right? So figure out what's the thing that really makes your work stand out and take us there and try to stick the landing. I don't often pass on stories because they didn't stick the landing if the other part is really great, because sometimes that's a really good revision request, and I've had some great success with revision requests. But I had to learn not to waste writers' times and bring up my hopes and their hopes too, because I have to remember most of the writers that I publish, I don't know them personally. I haven't worked with them before. So I can't say, oh, I know this writer, they're really good at these kinds of stories. If I tell them to do this or ask them this question, they'll know exactly what to do. I haven't had that chance to do that with them. And sometimes they may not know what to do. And so if it's a story that I like, but the revision request would be too much, and it would be really changing too much of their story, a really good personal rejection is better, because they can send it to an editor who really likes it as it is, or as close as what it is, without them doing a lot of work. And then you're still saying, it's still not there. You don't want to do that. And so I had to learn to be very selective with the revision requests.
Thank you. That's wonderful advice.
Yeah.
TAF has a unique relationship with Writer's Digest, and a lot of our members are book readers for their annual self-published book competitions. And my wife is one of them. And she's seeing persistent, regular problems throughout a lot of the books that she's been reading, which is really, obviously, you can tell are coming from new writers who are still kind of feeling their way through the process. Does anyone else have any questions for Sheree? Anybody?
I do. Sheree, you mentioned that sometimes you'll have a situation going on where you have multiple top 10 stories that you love. How do you go about culling down the ones that you feel like you can move forward with publishing for an edition of the magazine?
Well, I know how many slots I have, and I can approximate the size of it. I really don't know the exact page count until it's all the way into the page proof stage, right? But it's like, is this going to be a story that's going to be a novelty to my readers? Or is this like the 50th, fellow crewmen are going crazy in the ship in the sky, story? Because we've seen that a gazillion times. So I think about what is a new story to our world, right? Also, the impact that I think it has, like the emotional resonance that it might have. And then also the stories are in conversation with each other. So I may know other stories I already have earmarked for a particular issue, and someone else's particular story or their writing will be in great conversation with another story, or will be an interesting take, departure on the story, and they should be in the same volume together. So that's how I do that.
Okay.
Hi, I have a question.
Rebecca?
Yes, hello. How do you make your world building feel like it has depth in a short amount of words, a short number of words?
You use the skills of a poet, I think, by how you draw, or an artist, a visual artist, maybe, how the details that you bring us to. Like, if you want us to know, like there's a workshop I do on geography and speculative fiction, and how geography is actually storytelling, right? It's not just a tree, but it's the kind of tree, right? And anybody that has a green thumb will know what I'm talking about, right? Who's aware of that. The plant life, they have personalities, they require certain things. So if you have a specific geography, it shapes the people and the animals that are there. So if you have a world and you have the particular geography you've given it, that's going to affect their social traditions, how they fall in love or not, how they court each other, the sex that they may have or not, their fashion, the kinds of food they're able to eat, whether they feel safe or whether they're in danger in this particular place, right? What is the atmosphere of the world? What are the implications of the world building? And when you're able to give us that through dramatization, right? You know how they tell you with dialogue, regular conversation is very boring because we repeat ourselves, we say a lot, it doesn't really get to the point, we go in circles, etc. So as a writer, you have to take it and make it an approximation of a conversation, but without all the boring stuff that reality has. The same thing with the geography. You have to try to give us the gist of the world in a dramatic way that does at least two things for you. So you want dialogue to accomplish two things at least, so it does like double work for you, and it's not just on the nose. Are you tired? Yes, I'm tired. Do you want something to eat? Yes, I want something to eat. Like you want dialogue, like a strange way of that conversation happening that tells us characterization, gives us a bit of personality, gives us some insight on power dynamics between the two speakers, right? Lets us know a little bit about regionalisms. Like, are they from Chicago? Are they from the Bayou? Where are they from? They're from the Gullah Islands. Like, where are they from, right? What are the dynamics? Do they like each other? Do they trust each other? Do they have a long history with each other? You can do all that with dialogue. That's what you can do with your world building too. You could totally do that with world building. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have another one if that's
Yeah,
okay.
go ahead, Rebecca.
Okay, so how do you wrap up a short story and give a good satisfying ending with not a lot of time spent wrapping it up?
Oh,
It has to be a
I'm
short
so
story.
curious about you in this time.
Well, not
Are you
time
like
so
a
much as
novelist trying to write short stories? Are you
kind of.
is
So
your
I'm
natural lift a novelette? Like,
well, I'm very interested in writing for magazines like yours and Asimov's and stuff like that. I really do enjoy short stories, but I also am trying to write novels too. So just trying to kind of get an idea of how you do things in a short form versus long form, I guess.
I guess for me, in the beginning of my like learning how to be a writer, because like if we could just all read a book and be writers, it would be so much simpler, right? But there are like a gazillion how-to craft books out there, right? So
Yes, there are.
we haven't quite figured it out. But what I would do is I would have a great idea and I'd be so filled with the burning idea, like, oh, I'm gonna write this story, but I wouldn't be filled enough to know how it ended. And so I would write all this great stuff, get to the middle, and then it would start meandering. And I'm like, I've written myself into a corner because I didn't take time enough in the pre-writing stage to figure out the ending and what was at stake, really, what I really wanted to happen. And I always say the last lines, you should think about what it is that you want your reader to take away when they read the last line of your story. And when they close that book, what is it you want them to think and feel? So if you're outlining, you may be a pantser or you may be a leapfrogger or whatever it is. I have to have some type of outline, but not too detailed, or else I already feel like I wrote the story and it won't be fun for me. I still have to have a sense of discovery in it, but I need to have enough of the next scenes to keep going. And I realized later that I need to know the ending. I may not know the exact wording of the ending, but I need to know if they survive, if they do not, if they get what they want, if they don't get what they want. Is it, like what is at stake? And what do I want the reader to feel? If I have that, then I usually can write myself to that ending because I know where I'm going versus the journeying around the road and through the valley and up the hill that I did as a new writer.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know if that helps, but yeah.
It does. Yes, thank you.
Anyone else?
Sometimes are you a visual person? Are any of you visual people
Sometimes.
at all?
Yeah, sometimes.
So if you're a visual person, sometimes, I know this sounds very elementary, but it sometimes work. You can take the Post-its or those cards and you break down, like if you know the story, you break down the scenes, and then the parts that you don't know, you have a totally different color card because that's the blank parts you don't know yet. And then you can see where you are visually. And if you know this is the ending and you've got this many scenes to get to this point and you still have to get there, your imagination is you're gonna be able to feel it. You're gonna know what beats you need, story beats, to get us to that part, And I always just write like blank, like something happens here, I don't know. And keep going and write the part that I do know. And then when I go back, sometimes I'll realize, oh, I don't need a transition because I've already written the transition and it just reads like when I read it aloud, because you must read your work aloud. You absolutely must read your work aloud. That's like your second editor, read it out loud because it will tell you the false notes, the boring parts, the parts where you're like going, imagine over here, you're trying to distract us and it doesn't quite hang together. You'll hear it, right?
Okay.
Read it out loud. But once you do that, you can see those beats that are missing and you'll be able to write to it.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you.
Yes, that was helpful.
All right. Sheree, I can't thank you enough for this evening. This has been absolutely wonderful.
Thank
I
you.
really, truly appreciate all of the information and all of the insight that you shared with us this evening. This is
Thank you.
wonderful, wonderful stuff. Really,
Thank you.
really do
I
appreciate it.
appreciate you all inviting me. It's so good to see actual writers in the world, and then when you're not being weird. And you guys seem like really cool people.
We
Um,
are. Yeah. If you'd like to stay with us for a couple minutes, like I
I
said,
would like to hear good news. It's always
yes.
good to hear
Um,
good news.
Well, I've got a story to tell, but before I do that, does anyone else have anything good to share this evening?